Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Rachel Douglas, and I'm the Executive Director of the Innerwork Center here in Richmond, Virginia. We are a nonprofit, and our mission is to be a catalyst for well-being through our programs that inspire curiosity, cultivate mindfulness, and awaken the spirit. We envision an individual and collective that is community, human experience that is rich with compassion, authenticity, and meaning. And it just so happens that new research in psychology and in neuroscience shows that these are also the elements that lead to resilience. The scientific term is called prosocial tendencies, but this video today is not about the science. This is my personal story. So I want to say thank you to Amanda Lynch for inviting me to tell my story of resilience and to scan for the wonderful service of a week dedicated to resilience and for the crucial work that they do every day in our community. So as you can imagine, being the executive director of the Innerwork Center, I get asked, what is Innerwork? A lot. There's a lot of reasons that someone chooses to engage in inner work: self-compassion, stress management, forgiveness, healing, moving closer to your humanity, the easy stuff, and resilience. But since this is my story, I'm going to share what it means to me. And what I mean by inner work is the deep introspection that gives you clarity about what matters most to you. Not what you're told to think matters, what actually makes you awaken to your life. And I think the reason this is so appealing to me is that before I engaged in my own inner work, I thought it all mattered most. And I used to try to do all the things. In my mind, there's just so much work to do to create a compassionate world. And in my younger days, I thought all of it was my work to do. I felt and still feel very strongly that your struggle is wrapped up in my struggle, and my liberation depends on your liberation. So I made working for social justice my life's work. I educated myself. I organized and marched with groups such as Anti-Racist Action, Food Not Bombs, Feminist Action Network, Women's Advocates to Terminate Sexism, Richmond Queer Space Project, and Queer Paradise, just to name a few. I tried to start a citywide needle exchange program on my bicycle. At one point, I called my mom with the exciting news that I was now officially a volunteer with a nonprofit that I loved called the Fan Free Clinic. I heard her breathe in deeply, and with a sigh, she said, "Rachel, what do we have against fans now?" They've since changed their name to Health Brigade, but some of y'all out there remember. And my mom's assumption about being anti-fans was right on the mark. I was against a lot. I identified as anti-racist, anti-fascist, anti-sexist, anti-capitalist, anti-war, anti-traditional family units, anti-Republican and anti-Democrat, anti-meat, anti-car culture, and anti-oppression. It's a lot of resistance. And let me tell you, in case you don't already feel my spirit crushing under the weight of all of that resistance, being against everything is exhausting. It's important. These were important issues, but exhausting. And actually, not just exhausting. It was futile. So it's no surprise that I burned out big time. Y'all know what burnout is. If you didn't in 2019, you definitely do now in 2021. Burnout is a state of emotional, physical, mental, and I would add spiritual exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. It occurs when you feel overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and unable to meet the demands of everyday life. I felt the weight of injustice in comparison to my smallness. And the message my brain created for me was, you're not doing enough. What you do will never be enough. And you, in fact, are not enough. So I fell into a dark depression. It was like an I can't get out of bed depression. And I felt deep shame because of it. I felt deeply depressed because I didn't think that I was enough for my community. And the problems were too big for me to solve, which, like, obvious. And I was grappling with the privilege I had. And what right did I even have to feel depressed? I couldn't find my resilience. I had no concept of self-care and no concept of spirituality, because guess what? I was also anti-organized religion. And I really did believe that if you weren't religious, you weren't spiritual. Can I get a collective eye roll and maybe like a hug for young Rachel, please? So something had to change. And I could see only two options laid out before me. I could choose to live in mainstream society, or I could go off the grid, find a commune somewhere where I wouldn't have to deal with the weight of the world. I actually did scope out an intentional community. They made hammocks and tofu, but it was way too much nature for me. And for the record, I am totally pro-nature, but I also have zero experience living on a farm. The whole thing was too overwhelming. So I decided to remain in the mainstream world. But what appealed to me about living in an intentional community is that the people there seemed so content and happy. And they appeared to have a deep inner stillness that I wanted, but I didn't think I could have as an activist. I did come to realize that I wanted to live intentionally. I was living on about $10,000 a year at that point, which I was able to do by things like riding my bike instead of owning a car, growing food, shopping at thrift stores. And to me, this was intentional living. I was very careful about where I put my resources and making choices that felt ethical. However, as time went on, I began to acknowledge that it wasn't possible to live on $10,000 a year if I wanted things like a cell phone or health insurance or a good haircut. So I began to look for job opportunities using my degree. With a degree in interdisciplinary studies, focusing on what was then called women's studies and African American studies, my job prospects were bleak. After a year on the market, I decided to go back to school for a master's in social work. The MSW program at VCU surprised me. I had assumptions about social workers, broke, overworked, cynical. But there was this huge focus on self-care. It was embedded in everything. And self-care first to me sounded like an indulgence, but my understanding of it shifted when I came across a quote from the late Audre Lorde, who said, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare." The more I dug into Lorde's quote and began to explore it, I found that self-care really is an act of political warfare. It is especially revolutionary when performed by people who are culturally oppressed by messages that tell them that they aren't valued or worthy. Audre Lorde, who was a Black gay woman, said, "If I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive." As someone who is a Jewish gay woman, I could relate, not comparing being Jewish to being Black, but I could relate heavily to the sentiment. Little by little, I began to take ownership over the idea that self-care is also a radical act. I had to keep saying it over and over again to help myself believe it. And I've come to understand that's how neuroplasticity works. Your brain can be taught to change with repeated behaviors that create new neural pathways. So when my friends would ask me what I was up to, meaning, "What movement are you organizing with?" I would say, "I'm modeling self-care." And eventually I could say it without flinching. I just previously had this idea for our current society under capitalism to work. They needed to make me feel like I was wrong. Too Jewish, too hairy, too chubby, too loud, too gay. And I came to realize that self-care in the face of that effort is a radical political act. A little ways down the road, I found this little nonprofit working to create a wiser and more compassionate RVA. It was called Chrysalis then, and the Innerwork Center now, and I was overjoyed to become its executive director. When I say that none of my previous education compares to what I have learned at the Innerwork Center, that is not hyperbole. I found resilience, I found freedom, and I found my inherent enoughness. And I don't mean to sound like I'm done, like I've checked all of the boxes, but it really was the first time that these things shifted for me. So the first thing I realized is that I've been a very spiritual person my entire life, but I had no language for it. So I ignored, under-recognized, and belittled my own spirituality. My sense of connection to my community and to all beings everywhere without distinction is my spirituality. With this realization, my life changed in my first few months on the job. The impact was profound. God and religion didn't have to have anything to do with my spirituality. I am the author of my spirituality. My connection and affection with my ancestors, with my family, with my friends was a spiritual one. My appreciation of tomatoes growing in my garden is spiritual. My relationship with nature, it's spiritual. And with these realizations, I felt my sense of self, my sense of purpose, and my enoughness filling back up. My continuing mindfulness practice has helped me realize that I am enough. I have enough. The work I'm doing is enough. I don't have to do all the things. I only have to have the clarity to know which things are mine to do. Studying shadow work has exposed me to all that is still true from my anti-everything days, teaching me that my shadow is a really important component of my spiritual inner work. It's an inner guide highlighting what's most important to me. And this work that I'm doing right now, in this moment, on this video today, this is my work to do. Spreading the word to Richmond about our mission and vision is my work to do. We are a catalyst for well-being through programs that inspire curiosity, cultivate mindfulness, and awaken the spirit. We envision an individual and collective human experience that is rich with compassion, authenticity, and meaning. And that is my work to do. So I'd like to introduce you to a new Rachel. I am staunchly pro-liberation. I believe in the interconnectedness of all of life, and that compassion, not competition, is what makes humans survive and thrive. I am pro-art, pro-gardening, pro-connection to the natural world, and I am pro-spirituality, however you define spirituality. I'm no longer anti so many things, but I do still think I'm an activist. My activism is striving to be a good parent and a good partner and raising my kids in ways that align with my activist values, but in a loving, encouraging, and gentler way that is way more pro than anti. My values and my activism still share the same roots. They're just growing and flowering differently now. My activism comes from focused attention rather than chasing one activity to the next. And I believe I'm actually showing up as a more powerful version of myself now than I ever did before. The old Rachel's activism sucked energy away from me and the causes I was trying to support. I mean, how could it not? I was fueled by resistance. And now when I show up, my work energizes me instead of depleting me. And that's what resilience is all about. It's aligning your energy with your values and your gifts. It's knowing what is yours to do in the world. It will lift you up, which lifts us all. I have two mentors. One that says progress is an inside job, and one that says I am the work. I think they both encompass what resilience is all about. When I meditate, I get glimpses of the way that I want to be in the world. I'm pretty sure that's called wisdom. I have these moments of clarity where I can step out of the din and ask, is this mine to do? Is this where I put my gifts? Am I acting in a certain way because of self-doubt and anger? or out of confidence and clarity. And when I have that awareness, I don't get caught up in my emotions. I have the freedom to choose where I channel my energy-giving work. For me, that's where commitment comes from. And once you have commitment to someone or something, you are able to be courageous. True courage can only come from your heart, from my heart, from your heart. It cannot be given to us from the outside, which is why you have to do your inner work, y'all. Begin within. So I may have realized these things, but I haven't arrived anywhere. I'm still a work in progress. I'm right here alongside you doing my inner work every day. And that is my work to do. And I hope that you'll join me. Thank you for listening.